Hey, Bruce. Lots of feedback, so I will push ahead. You mentioned learning more about the natural history of this disease. How do you think it typically starts and manifests?
That's a good question. But as one speaks to people, what they remember is the fever, of course, and in 88%. Now the nice thing, China has 55,000 cases and data on every single one of them at the time of onset. And what they report is 88% say we had fever, 68% say they had a dry cough, and that's important numbers because, folks, what percent have a runny nose? Throw a guess out there. Because, you always see people going around sniffling and the rest of it. You worry, do they have COVID-19? 4%. It's not an upper respiratory tract infection. So, but Jason, sorry, back to your question. They report that, or they report just the couple of days before having what we call prodromal-like syndromes. They feel fatigued, they feel myalgia, they feel unwell. It's just a general unwellness. So part of this is having a high index of suspicion if you think you've been exposed to someone, because they either present with that fever, a dry cough, or that prodromal, non-specific malaise, aches and fatigue. Does that cover it, Jason?
Actually, I wanted to ask you what's causing the pneumonia to progress to acute respiratory distress syndrome and multi-organ failure. What do we know about that?
That was interesting because a couple of places had documented the data fairly well. It's not published yet, but what it looks like, about 80% of these are, as I mentioned, mild at time of detection, about 13% severe, and about 6% in critical condition. And then if you look at the percent that progress from one to another, about 15% seem to progress from mild to severe, and then from severe to critical, because I thought it was a higher percent, but it's about 15 to 20% again, Jason. That's what those numbers look like. And then if you look at the survival rates per group, that's pretty well published, right? Extremely high in the milds, and then I'd have to pull the numbers out. But the high mortality obviously is in the severes and especially the criticals. And here you have to be careful, right? Because people say, well, what proportion of severe and critical survive? And okay, so say it's 80% in Chinese facilities or 90%. That's not what it's going to be in other places. They're really good at managing really complicated disease on big scale right now. So I would not have a false sense of security in the numbers.
Okay, one more online. Tammy, BBC, I have.
Hello?
Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. I would like to know, what is your response to Miles Blow telling Steve Bannon that millions of people are infected and that 250,000 are in fact really dead?
We didn't quite get your question. Was that something about 250,000 really bad, or 200? Could you kindly repeat that one?
What is your response to Miles Blow telling Steve Bannon that millions are infected and 200,000 are actually dead in China?
Yeah, I think, Tammy, I've not seen whatever you just referred to. So, again, not dodging a question, but I simply don't know what I'm responding to. I heard two people, one of them said there's a million cases and 250,000 dead and being hidden in China or something like that. I didn't go to every single place in every corner of China, but I think we have a pretty good sense of what the epidemic looks like, and I think these numbers are reflective of that. I mean, but I don't know where they're information comes from. And again, this comes back, I get asked a lot of questions. Well, what about this and what about that? I've got to go with the data that we see. And anything that I told you, we tried to use multiple data points to try and observations to try and corroborate it, right? We didn't try and we heard that from someone, let's go with it. Everything. And the team, remember, I told you was on this team, CDC, NIH, Robert Koch, Japan's top institutes, et cetera. And they all sign off on this thing. So they're pretty rigorous.
Okay, questions from the room.
You gotta let Jamie ask a question.
Okay, all right. You can. Poor Jamie, hiding behind.
Am I not allowed to do that?
Thank you. Sorry, no echo on this one, hopefully. A couple of things, if I could. You mentioned that the science is evolving very fast in China. One of the things that's come out recently is that there may be an oral vaccine in preparation in China. What do you know about that? If you could also tell us about how the two treatment trials are going, and particularly the HIV combo drugs with remdesivir. And then just also in the numbers that you've come up with, the Director General Tedros yesterday mentioned to us that there was seemed to be a disparity in the mortality rate between Wuhan and the rest of China. Could you try to explain why that is? Thanks.
Oh, sorry, pardon me. First was about the question about the oral vaccine. I don't have information on that, but there were parts of the team that really dug into some of the science that was being done. So we may be able to find something on that. So apologies. In terms of the treatment trials, in terms of how they're going, of course, these are blinded trials, et cetera, right? So I remember somebody asked me, "Oh, great, you talked to Chow Bin. How is it looking for remdesivir?" It's a blinded, double-blinded trial. Well, I don't know. But what I was interested in talking to him, Jamie, was how are you doing on enrollment? What's the timeline to get to your interim numbers where you could actually look at this and the results? And they, as I say, the enrollment had slowed down. There's two different remdesivir trials, and it slowed down, but they're still enrolling. So because it's urgent. We've got to get answers to outstanding questions super fast, because if this drug saves lives, we need to know that. And so one of the conversations we had in China was, well, how do we prioritize enrollment for the trials that are the most promising? And then how do you make that decision? Because, there's corporate interests and everything else behind these. But going well. I mean, the amazing thing, remember as well, you've seen the pictures of Wuhan, and folks are in there running multiple clinical trials. And similarly on the HIV ones, there's, if I remember correctly, some groups have already released some information. But we're very careful as well. These trials are designed to get answers as quickly as they can. And if we meddle and ask the wrong questions, et cetera, we want to know, is there any way we can help you get to the answers you want faster? And clearly recruitment was one area. It's a great story, right? Less people are getting sick, but on the other hand, we may not get this answer. Your second question, Oh yeah, Wuhan's higher mortality rate, right? Yeah. So there's a couple of things that probably contribute to that, because one is three things would contribute to the difference that we see. The first is it happened at a different time. Wuhan started fast and early. We didn't know what we were dealing with. We were learning how to treat this. And remember, they've been through 6 different treatment guidelines, right? So some of that high mortality you're seeing is the first couple of treatment guidelines when we were learning how to do this. The second thing was just the sheer scale of the numbers, and this is specialized care. So that could have been a challenge. But the third thing, and this goes back to the point that Helen was making, that at the beginning of this outbreak, remember, people were finding severe disease, and that's why the alarm bells went off. And so we're sometimes looking at, because we are getting more mild cases now as knowledge of the disease goes up, and we're trying to get them, and people are understanding you got to isolate the mild disease as well. They can't stay home. That's what's fueling. That's the fuel that's keeping this thing going. So you got the mild cases in, and you got more sight on those, and that's broadening your denominator. But one important thing I want to highlight, folks, is I've heard it say, oh, the mortality rate's not so bad because there's actually way more mild cases. Sorry, the same number of people that were dying, still die. And if that was a problem and a concern, that is still a big problem and a concern. So we have to be careful how we interpret, and these numbers sometimes.
Okay, one more from the room. This lady here. Yes.
Yes, Isabel Saco for Spanish News Agency.
Right.
After all you have learned in China, which appears to be very impressive, how do you explain, for example, what is happening in Europe, the rapid spread of the disease in northern Italy? Is after 1 month of the declaration by WHO, they were not ready to manage a situation like this, and what are because at some moment you said that war is not really prepared for this. What did you mean by that? Did you mean by that? And if you should advise 5 steps to countries, what they have to have to from the situation, what would you say about that?
Okay. So first, I want to be very careful. I have not been in any other country that's been managing this thing, and I don't want to make judgment calls. And again, there's, I really want to stick to where we've got data and what I know happened. So I don't know the circumstance about other countries, but I think there's really important lessons from it already, right? And this is happening in northern Italy, where you've got good systems, and you saw the action that they took, right? I mean, they're acting on scale to try and manage this. I don't know the details of it, so I don't want to go beyond that. But this tells you what this virus can do, and I think I keep saying, okay, well, this happens on that boat. Well, this happens in Korea, or that happens there. And I keep hearing people saying, yeah, but that was because of this, or, oh, yeah, but that was because of this. I mean, this virus will show up. You have to think. So, in terms of the steps, number one, think the virus is going to show up tomorrow. Think Italy didn't know they were going to find that. They think it's going to be there tomorrow, right? You're an incredibly interconnected world. There was a fantastic paper came out a couple of weeks ago, which showed the spread of this virus in China compared with, if I remember correctly, was it the 2009 flu pandemic, which was only 10 years ago. And if I remember correctly, every province with this virus had been hit in 23 days. With just 10 years ago, it took 120 days or something like that for all of the provinces. So, we're just so much more connected. So you got to think it's going to be here tomorrow. If you don't think that way, you're not going to be ready. So first thing is that mindset shift. And the thing you got to think is, if it hits us, we're going to stop it. You have to think that way. And I keep hearing, this, oh, if it hits us, we just have to accept and it's going to spread. And why? You've lost before you've started. So there's that mindset shift. The second thing is, if you're planning to be ready, you're going to need beds to isolate people. You're going to need to be able to quarantine the really close contacts, because we know 10% of those are going to get disease. So, and we know that they may not even know it at the beginning. So you've got to be able to accommodate those people. You have got to have enough ventilators for the serious cases. You have got to know how you're going to transport people to those places, right? Because you don't want to be managing this in many, many different areas. You've got to have oxygenation, ventilators I mentioned. You've got to have the lab capacity to be able to do this. China is testing tens of thousands of people every day still for this thing. So it's big time lab capacity, and it's not an x-ray. They don't do x-rays of these people in China. They CT scan them, because on a CT scan, you can find disease that you can't find on x-ray. How many of our countries have got CT scanning capacity. How many people can we get through a CT scanner? Like 10 in a day? China put 200 people through a CT scanner in a day, right? I mean, they have systems to make it work. So you've got to be ready. Hopefully you'll never use that, right? But if you're ready to do that, you're going to be ready for an awful lot of things. But it's readiness and rapid response capacity. So then someone's got to know how to investigate one of these cases. So do you have 100 people who know how to fill out a case investigation form, or 1,000? Or is it going to be looking at that case form